This is The Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of sports and give a little bit of the history behind some of them. We're not trying to change your mind, we just want to dive deeper into the topics that keep you tuned in to the teams you love. You know what's beautiful about sports? The opportunity of it all. The opportunity and the hopefulness that comes with never knowing what's next. Just look at week 1 in the NFL. No matter what team you're a fan of, there's always this hopefulness that comes from seeing your favorite team wearing their brand new clean uniforms and their shiny new helmets. You look at the roster and think, maybe, just maybe, this year is our year. You look at the standings and see everyone with 0 wins and 0 losses, and you think, well, everyone has a chance. You think like that until you realize you're a Browns fan. Or maybe you're a Jets fan. You think like that until you realize that over the last 14 years, the AFC Championship has been won by only 4 different quarterbacks. So it begs the question, when you watch sports, how much do you value parity? Do you prefer the MLB, where almost every team on the face of the earth is still in the wild card race? Or do you prefer the NBA, where the finals seem like a foregone conclusion, but you have this electrifying dominance that you can grab onto? And if you were to run a league of your own, would you rather the parity or the dominance? I'm Eddie Cotton, and alongside me is my panel. To join me today, we have IU sports media connoisseur Griffin Weinberg, and from iOS TV, Austin Machicardi and Michael Tilka. Now, just to start off the conversation, in general, Griffin, what are your thoughts on parity versus dominance? When you watch sports, what is your preference?
Well, I think from the standpoint of the NBA, I guess we can start with that. I'm not too big of a fan of it because obviously you have the Warriors and then you have the Cavs every single year, and they're going to the NBA Finals. And the thing is, before the season even starts, we know that those teams are going to be going to the finals. For example, the Warriors are minus 350. They have minus 350 odds to win the NBA championship. Never in the history of the NBA has there been a team that's actually been favored like that to win the NBA finals. So I think you really want to see more teams get involved, and you want to see more parity in that. You look at the MLB, you have, like 10 different teams in the American League who are fighting for a wild card spot. Even the Minnesota Twins, I mean, they came out of nowhere. I think they were the worst team in the MLB last year with over 100 losses, and now they're up there. It's more exciting. Like, I mean, you think of the MLB postseason a few years ago where you had the A's, you had the Royals, you had all these teams that have never really been there in a long time, and then just like that, they can make it. I think it's just more fun. It's more exciting to see all these younger teams that people don't expect to be there. That's just my opinion.
Well, Griffin, you spoke about the NBA, and you said that we know that it's going to be Cavs-Warriors. And I believe for the most part that's true. But, the dominance of those two teams has, encouraged other teams to step up their game. Over this summer, we saw, the Rockets go out and trade for Chris Paul. So now they have that stunning backcourt duo of Chris Paul and James Harden. We saw the Oklahoma City Thunder go out and get a running mate for Russell Westbrook. He doesn't have to be Mr. Triple-Double anymore because he's got Paul George. So, I mean, and then the Celtics. The Celtics went and got Kyrie Irving. They went and they got Gordon Hayward. The Celtics are coming for the Cavs this year. Obviously, the Cavs still have LeBron James. But just, the dominance of those two teams has caused others to step up their game, and I think that that's good for the sport.
But the question I want to pose to you, Austin, is that Oklahoma City makes this big deal for Paul George. Houston goes and gets Chris Paul. The Celtics get Gordon Hayward. Does all of that really matter in the end when you still have to go up against LeBron James, Isaiah Thomas, and Kevin Love in the East, or you have to go up against Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson in the West?
It doesn't really. I mean, when you look at it, those teams are great. But, just the fact that we're seeing all of these superstar team-ups, fans have clamored in the past, oh, we want Team Banana Boat. We want LeBron, and we want Chris Paul, and we want Melo, and we want them all to be on the same team. It's happening now. So those fans that asked for it, 2, 3, 4 years ago, this is what they wanted, so they shouldn't complain.
But then you look at teams like the 76ers and the Kings that have been in this abysmal state of inability to compete, and you look at their fan bases and you ask, how do you still watch? how are you looking at this league with optimism, and how do you go to games?
In my opinion, there's two different kinds of teams in the NBA. You've got the teams that are going for it. You've got the Warriors, the Cavs, the Thunder, all these teams that are chock full of superstars that are trying to win that title right now. And then you've got the rebuilding teams. For the most part, you're either one or the other. The rebuilding teams like the Sixers, they've got all these, cool young stars. It's like the Sixers are kind of a trendy team right now. Everybody wants to be a Sixers fan because they've got all these young guys, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons. They're all kind of, interesting personalities. So I mean, not being in the race for the finals doesn't necessarily mean that you're pushed out of the limelight per se. So I mean, it all depends on how good your front office is. Say, because the Sixers, obviously it's taken a while for them to get to where they are, but now that they're here, they're kind of on the front stage, even though we have no idea how they're going to do this season.
I think it's an interesting note to sort of look at and see that I think the NBA is sort of going in the direction that the MLB has been in for years. And you're either A, you're going for the World Series title, or B, you're going to sit back for a few years, rebuild some of your team. Like the White Sox have been doing a fantastic job of that this year. They went and got Yoan Moncada, he's now playing. They got Lucas Giolito, Michael Copley. And it's really fascinating to see the NBA sort of go in that direction of, you're either rebuilding or you're going for it all. There's really none of that in between, which I think is fascinating.
That's true, because in the past we've seen teams such as when Carmelo Anthony was on the Nuggets, they were kind of stuck being a 7 or 8 seed every single season. And who wants to see that? The same team comes back every single year. Every single year they're a 7 seed. They go out in 5 or 6 games of the 2 seed, and the season's over. That's so much fun. I want to watch that every single year. That's great. That's great for the fans.
Well,
it doesn't look like you're having fun there, Austin.
It doesn't look like that much fun. But we mentioned the fans now. Switch the perspective. Looking at those who run these leagues, what's more beneficial, you think, for capturing a national audience? Would you rather have these dominant teams, or would you rather be run by a league that has 18, 19 teams competing?
Well, I think if you're playing for the championship and you want more viewers to be viewing the finals, then obviously having a matchup like the Warriors and the Cavs, you're going to draw the fans to come in every single year, because you know that they're going to be there. You know that they're, rivals, we could say, even though they don't want to claim that they're rivals. But it's a fun matchup because, it's like, all right, now it's a best of 3 series, or it's a best of 7 series it turns into, like that. So for the finals, you want that kind of dominant team, because I think that's going to bring in more. Fans. But for a season-long venture, no one's really watching the MLB right now. It's just no one's really kind of enjoying that. You need to have a little bit more parity, and you need to have more excitement going on for the season-long run for people to be coming in. And
you know what? I think that part of that is kind of just the construction of the games that these teams are playing. If you look at basketball, if you have one really good player, he can just kind of dominate the game. You look at a guy like LeBron James, he doesn't really even need, other stars around him, and that team is still going to be successful. You look at his original run in Cleveland, those weren't the best teams, but he still carried them on his back every single year to the finals. But then you look at a game like baseball that's so kind of, team-oriented. And, you've got guys, obviously, the rise of the home run is kind of taking that away a little bit. But, you still have to rely on, you have to have 4, 5, 6, pretty good guys surrounded with other guys that, are good role players.
And I think one thing that we've sort of overlooked, and even Eddie brought it up in his opening monologue, is the NFL, because I believe that the NFL has found the sweet spot when it comes to parity, because with the NBA, you're putting over half the league into the playoffs, but you're only really getting a few teams, whereas the NFL, I find it incredibly interesting because you have about probably 5 teams every week. You could look at 5 and say, you know what, those teams could win the Super Bowl. And it changes from week to week. And then when playoffs roll around, you're like, okay, there's still that group of 5 teams that really could win it. And sort of that week to week type thing where every week it's something new, it's something different, and there's still opportunities to go out and win games. I think the NFL has really found a good spot for it.
To counter that, you say that from a season perspective. When you're looking at this season, there are about 5 or 6 teams that could win the Super Bowl. Those 5 or 6 teams are the same teams they were the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before.
Well, here's an interesting thing I want to bring up, because you said about the AFC that it's really been Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger have won about 14 out of the 15 besides Joe Flacco. of the AFC championships. Whereas the NFC, you have guys like Rex Grossman winning the NFC championship, Drew Brees. You have so much more parity in the NFC. I just think it happens to be just a weird coincidence that you have two probably best all-time players in Manning and Brady, who Manning's already been retired, Tom Brady's already 40, and Ben Roethlisberger, even just this past season, said, I'm considering retirement right now. I think we're almost beyond the point where you're going to see a lot more parity in the AFC, hopefully, but I don't think the NFC should be overlooked so easily like that.
Well, you mentioned that, but I want to take a look maybe at these teams that pretty much have just been an abyss of mediocrity for years and years, the Jets, the Browns, and Griffin, you're a Bengals fan. I want to hear your perspective. How do you handle being a fan of a team that seems to just always be average?
Oh, I hate it. It's literally the worst feeling that you can ever have. Because they went to the playoffs 5-6 years in a row. I think it was 5 years in a row. And every single year you think that they're going to win, and then they just end up losing. I think now I'm actually a little bit happy because I know that there's a very little chance that they're going to make the playoffs because, they've kind of given up a little bit. They're starting to rebuild, get some younger players in there. So personally, from my perspective, I'm a little bit more satisfied knowing where my team is going to be. But, there was a terrible 5 years, especially that Steelers playoff game when Vontaze Burfict, he got the penalty, and then Jeremy Hill fumbled. And that was actually probably the worst moment of my life. But I don't know. It's kind of tough.
When you look at the NFL, my thing is that, like Michael said, you've got that, that parity kind of in the season. It's like, oh, there's so many teams that are good and blah, blah, blah. But I think that's really more like the teams that are vying for the back of the playoffs. Those are the teams that are going for the wild cards. You get a nice little change of, teams that are getting those back end spots or getting the wild cards. The same teams are winning those divisions though. And when you get down to the, NFC, AFC championship game, the Super Bowl, we're seeing the same teams over and over and over because they get in there and they demolish those wild card teams that are rotating through. You've got the teams that have built their programs. You look at, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and, New England. Those guys have built a kingdom, and they're coming for the rest of the league, and nobody's going to stop them. So, when you look at it, those kind of teams that have, been around for a while, they've established a winning culture and stuff like that. Those teams are usually the ones that are playing at the end of the season, even though it seems like there's a lot of hope for a lot of different teams throughout the season.
It's a unique concept to look at with all these four major leagues, the NHL even, if you want to consider how the Stanley Cup playoffs are so competitive. But another conversation that we haven't had yet, and we're going to get to coming up after break, our panel will discuss parity in college sports. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Toss-Up. We just got finished up with a rather riveting conversation about parity in the major leagues that we see every day. But what about college athletics? I'm going to send it your way, Austin. What is your perspective on how parity affects college athletics?
I believe that there's one stark difference between college and professional athletics as far as parity goes. And it's the fact that in the pros, you can sign free agents, you can draft players, you can make trades. In college sports, it's all recruiting. So, when you have programs like Kentucky basketball that are bringing in 8 one-and-dones, and they've got this just monster rotation year after year after year, no matter what, because they recruit well. It's bad for parity, and it's ultimately bad for the game, in my opinion.
But the question I want to follow up with that is, can you ever really achieve parity when, even just looking at basketball conferences, football conferences, it seems to be a level of Power 5 schools, Group of 5 schools. So can you ever really achieve that parity, even in Division I, when you just not even the same conferences are on the same level?
I believe that with that, it happens kind of over time. You see smaller schools like UC Butler coming out, and they built up a nice program. They've got the Butler way and whatnot. And they've developed into a nice basketball program. They've moved up the ladder kind of conference-wise. They're in the Big East now. It's a pretty good basketball conference. So, it's not going to happen overnight. But, if you get the right people into your program and you build up, then sure, you can get to the highest level of college basketball.
And I think that the big difference between like college and professional sports is when there's an upset in like the NFL or the NBA, we don't call it an upset. We pretty much just say, oh, they're professionals, they're supposed to win. But when there's an upset in college sports, we say, wow, how did that happen? This is a huge upset that's just kind of crazy. That's one of the reasons why I don't think that we're ever going to see parity in college sports. Because you talk about Kentucky basketball recruiting, as long as Coach Calipari's there, they're going to keep getting one and dones, and they're going to keep getting the best players and all the McDonald's All-Americans. For Nick Saban, as long as he's at Alabama and as long as they're always going to be in the top 5 in the preseason polls and go to the college football playoff every single year, we're not going to see any other teams try to really match up to them. I mean, there's going to be those consistent teams like Alabama, Ohio State, Penn State, what have you, but there's really never going to be a point where every team in Division I in their respective sports are all going to be equal.
And I believe that it's kind of like I mentioned before the break during our previous discussion, it's kind of the makeup of the sport because, in football, you've got, the 5-star guys that are going to Alabama. Those are all the biggest, strongest guys, and that obviously gives them the advantage. But then you've got basketball, where you can kind of have, a scrappy team that plays a specific style, and maybe you get the matchup and you win, 15 versus 2 seed in the round of 64 and stuff like that. So football just kind of doesn't have the makeup as a game for those kinds of upsets, and I think that's, one of the biggest differences between the two.
I think an interesting way in which we could see more parity in college football is if we moved from the bowl system to, I think, a 16-team playoff system. And what you do is you take each conference champion and then a handful of at-large bids and have them go at it. I think that's why the NCAA basketball tournament is so successful, because if you are truly the best team in the land, you have to go out and win 6 games in a row. And so you don't always get the absolute best team winning the tournament, which I think is fun and fascinating and keeps parity interesting in the NCAA.
Yeah, and while I like that idea, it's really going to take a long time for 16 teams to form into a college football playoff, because that means that you either have to finish the regular season shorter or you have to extend the playoffs into February or something like that. And for a lot of people, there could be a lot of trouble. I like that idea. It's just in the near future, I don't see it being realistic.
And I believe that another thing you have to consider with that is the fact that, a lot of these schools, with less football tradition, maybe say, like an Indiana University, when we go to a bowl game in San Francisco that only 5 people show up to watch in person, we're excited. Everybody's like, oh, we're going to the bowl game. But, if you shift to that 16-team system, then a lot of those schools get left out, and it's just it's not necessarily bad for the sport, but the schools definitely, I don't think they would like that very much.
So you guys have made arguments, and a lot of it's surrounded the fact that I think parity's very difficult to create in college athletics, but I don't think you've answered the question of whether they should be striving for that in the first place. Would you want to see parity more in college football? Would you want to see more parity in college basketball?
The weird answer I have is I don't think I do want to see parity in college sports, because the reason why we love college sports is because of all the craziness that happens. You can't see Liberty beat Baylor in the NFL. You can't see Howard beat UNLV and be the biggest on the books upset in college football history. So I'm kind of okay with not having that parity, because it creates that excitement and sort of the unknown factor.
That's true. It's kind of like Griffin was saying, pro sports, when there's an upset, we don't call it an upset because there's more parity at the pro level than there is at college. At the college level, like Michael was saying, there's, these huge upsets. It's like, oh, it's so amazing because there's less parity. And, if we were to strive for more parity, that would kind of go away, and that's what makes the college game great.
Griffin, any thoughts?
I love the upsets. I mean, yeah, going back to my point, I want to see that number 15 seed Middle Tennessee State beat Michigan State. I want to see Lehigh beat Duke. The only time where it really gets that exciting in professional sports, I guess you can bring it to the We Believe Warriors back in I think it was 2007, 2008, when they upset, I think it was the Mavericks. They were the number 1 seed in the NBA playoffs. But, I mean, besides that, you really don't get those upsets. So I think, I'll agree with both of you. I don't want to see parity in college sports because I love those diehard Alabama fans as much as I also hate them at the same time. But I just love the energy that they bring there. I want to see all these Duke basketball fans go crazy because that's what really brings college sports alive.
Well, that really does it for our panel discussion. And from my perspective, ultimately what I believe is that each of these leagues are different in their own ways, and you have to appreciate that, and that's what creates these preferences and what you prefer. Some might prefer watching the NBA, where a lot of the drama occurs off the court, and some might prefer college basketball rather than NCAA football because they can point to March Madness and the chaos of that. But really, it all just comes down to preference and what you enjoy more. That does it for this show this week. Be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at iOS TV Sports and on our Facebook page at iOS TV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions you might have. Toss it up. Find out if we'll catch it. Until next Sunday, be proud and cheer loud.